Do you guys ever think about the role that superheroes play in our society and culture? No? Just me? Well, for what it's worth, I think that superheroes play a very important role in American society, and we need their stories. When you look at the times when superheroes had their biggest booms in popularity, an interesting trend starts to appear. The Great Depression and World War II, the 1960s with threat of nuclear war and the civil rights movement, and the 2000s post 9/11. They're all times when superheroes kind of gained popularity. But why? Hello and welcome to the Chemist's Codex. My name is Peter. I like to talk about chemistry and comic books and movies and TV shows and whatever else might catch my interest. So, if any of that sounds interesting, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss my next upload. So, why do I think we need superheroes? Well, the short answer is one word: hope. That's it, plain and simple. Superheroes give us hope, and that's why we need them and their stories. But before I get into why exactly I believe this, I want to give a brief overview of some comic book history as some context. I'm going to do my best to try to keep this part of the video brief, giving just some key details and highlights. This is also all from my own memory, so apologies in advance if I forget a detail or leave something out. There is some debate as to what actually classifies as the first comic, since any sequence of images that tell a story can kind of be considered a comic. But the modern day comic book evolved from the comic strip that was found in newspapers, and those evolved from political cartoons. The golden age of comics really began with the publishing of Action Comics #1 and the debut of Superman in 1938. Superman was created by Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster while they were still in high school, and this first Superman story featured the character fighting against a lot of social injustice. He fought an abusive husband and a landlord trying to scam their tenants, just to give a couple of examples. This led to a massive influx of superheroes. You had characters like Batman, Captain America, Wonder Woman, Captain Marvel, Namor, all created due to that increased demand for superhero stories. And one thing that I think is really important to note here is how intrinsically tied comic books are to Jewish American culture. Comic books were seen as a lesser art form at the time, and so oftentimes the people who worked on them were Jewish or Jewish immigrants or the children of Jewish immigrants because that was the only work that they could get. And frankly, to me, that makes this comic book cover all the better. Now, after World War II, people were kind of tired of fighting, and so superheroes largely fell out of popularity, barring a few examples like Superman. Rather than superheroes, people were drawn to westerns and horror and crime and comedy and romance comics. This kept up through the 1950s until Frederick Wortham, a psychologist who worked predominantly with children, published his book Seduction of the Innocent. Wortham noticed that the disturbed children that he worked with all read comic books, and drew the conclusion that they were disturbed because of the comic books. And at the time, horror and crime comics featured graphic imagery or detailed diagrams of how to commit various crimes, so this conclusion isn't entirely unreasonable. Even still, this ultimately led to the creation of the Comics Code Authority, essentially a way for comic book publishers to self censor themselves. The original code was very strict on what could, and more importantly, could not be featured in a comic book. And this is what led comic book publishers to return to superheroes. This is around when the Silver Age begins. I believe most comic book historians put the official start of the Silver Age with the publishing of Fantastic Four #1. And the predominant theme of the Silver Age was science and technology and exploration of these topics. One thing I find interesting is how Marvel and DC differed in their views of these topics. DC showed the brighter side, showing how science can better people's lives, while Marvel tended to show the darker side of the consequences of unrestrained science. At this point, the real boundaries between the comic book ages start to kind of blur a bit. I believe most comic book historians put the end of the Silver Age and the start of the Bronze Age with the death of Gwen Stacy in Amazing Spider-Man. And the Bronze Age featured a lot more adult and darker themes due to the comics code being a bit more relaxed over time. The Bronze Age ended around the late 80s into the early 90s as comic books kept taking on a darker tone, with the publishing of books like Watchmen, The Dark Knight Returns, and The Killing Joke Comic book publishers realized that darker, more mature stories sold reasonably well, and this led to the dark age of comics. This not only referred to the tone of the comic books being published, but also due to the fact that in the mid 90s, the comic book industry crashed. I'm not going to get into all the factors as to why the comic book industry crashed, but in short, it was due to speculators trying to make money off of comic books without realizing that for a comic to be worth anything, it has to be both important and rare. The comics of the 90s were framed as being very important, but they were selling millions of copies, so they weren't rare. They also weren't that great in terms of writing and art, in my personal opinion, but I know some people really like the art style. After the 90s, comic books moved into the modern era, and the modern era is largely defined by event storylines. This started with big crossover events like Civil War that featured many characters, as many as the writers could possibly fit in, but it has since sort of calmed down to now be more centered around a character or a group of characters and sort of is more of a conclusion to an ongoing story. Now, getting into why I believe superheroes give us hope, when you look at all the times when superheroes had big booms in popularity, they're all times of uncertainty. Times when people needed a reason to feel like everything was going to be okay. It all goes back to the creation of superheroes with Superman. Look at what was happening in the world when Superman was created. The Great Depression was still going strong, and the world was about to be thrust into war with World War II. Even though the war hadn't officially started yet, people saw the writing on the wall and knew that they were in trouble, and they needed a reason to feel hope. I think the need for Superman at this time is summed up great with a quote from comic book writer Grant Morrison. Somewhere in our darkest night, we made up the story of a man who will never let us down. And the interview this quote comes from gives even more insights into why Superman is such a good character for this. In the interview this quote comes from, Morrison was talking about All Star Superman and how we've pretty much deconstructed all of our superheroes. So when you've constructed and deconstructed your superheroes, what do you do then? According to Morrison, you take them at face value. The through line for All Star Superman is that Superman is dying. And there's a part of the story where he makes a separate, smaller universe that he can observe over time to make sure that the world will be okay without him. And it's sort of implied that in this universe he makes, the Earth that results is ours. So in a world without Superman, we still create Superman. Superman is the ideal and ultimate good. He will always help, no matter how small a problem. He will defend Metropolis from whatever supervillain might be attacking it, and then go and give someone who needs it a hug. He does good for no reason other than it is good. Another time when superheroes really boomed in popularity was in the 2000s, and I would argue that this is largely due to the aftermath of 9/11. To explain what I mean by this, I want to take a look at Spider Man. I like to say that Spider Man is the hero of New York. Sure, plenty of heroes call the city home, but Spider Man has that special something that just makes him uniquely New York, you know? This is why Marvel decided to address the events of 9/11 in Amazing Spider Man Volume 2, number 36, an issue known as the Black Issue due to its lack of cover art. This is a very powerful issue that I highly recommend everyone read. I'm young enough that I don't remember 9/11 that well, but this issue helped me comprehend just how truly horrific that day was. There's one part in particular in the Black Issue that really gets to me. In the aftermath of the attacks, Spider Man is on the streets helping with the cleanup. And while helping, he sees a little boy sitting in the middle of the street. Spider Man goes up to the boy and tells him that he shouldn't be here, that it's unsafe. The boy looks up at Spider Man and tells him that his dad told him to stay there and he ran into the building. And the boy says that if he's a good boy and does what his father says, then he'll come back. And then the boy trails off as he sees his father's corpse being carried from the rubble. There are no words. Then something kind of interesting happened in May of 2002. The Sam Raimi Spider-Man movie released, and there's a part during the climactic fight between Spider-Man and the Green Goblin on the Queensboro Bridge that I think is very important. While Spider-Man is hanging from the bridge, holding up a cable car, trying to keep Mary Jane and a bunch of kids safe, the Green Goblin goes in for an attack only to be thwarted by civilians on the bridge throwing various objects at him. And the civilians say these lines.
You mess with mine, you mess with New York! You mess with one of us, you mess with all of us!
I can't say for sure, but I feel like that scene gave people some degree of catharsis. It showed the hero that represents New York City being saved by the very people of New York. It's a scene that shows us how superheroes can inspire hope in us to keep fighting. Now, I know that's only two examples, but I think they're some of the best examples I could give when arguing that superheroes give us hope. They're examples that show two of the most famous superheroes in the world being used in response to dark and uncertain times. To give a more general example, I want to discuss a bit about the idea of superheroes as a modern mythology. This isn't exactly a new idea to say that superheroes are a modern American mythology. I mean, look at Marvel and DC. They use established mythologies in their lore. Marvel is probably better known for using Norse mythology and characters like Thor and Loki, and DC uses Greek mythology centered around characters like Wonder Woman. There is some debate as to whether superheroes can actually count as mythology, and I think this comes down to what your viewpoint of a myth is. If you see a myth as something that ancient civilizations used to explain phenomena around them that they didn't fully understand, then you're probably not going to think superheroes count as a mythology. Personally, I like the more psychological approach to explain why humans around the world have always created myths. As humans, we like to tell stories, and I think the stories that we choose to tell each other can tell us a lot about the kind of person that we are and what we value. In this context, myths aren't created to explain the world around us, but rather they serve the purpose of explaining what it means to be human. They give us moral guidance and inspiration and entertainment. To be human is to tell stories. In the case of superheroes, they serve this purpose really well. Many superheroes have a moral code that they follow. Like I mentioned earlier, Superman does good for no reason other than it's good. Spider-Man has his famous mantra, with great power comes great responsibility. Batman is well known for his no-kill rule, and Green Lantern literally has an oath. Superheroes can also inspire us. It's very common to see our heroes fail before they succeed. That's just a basic component of storytelling. I like to refer to this as the Act 2 slump, but it's probably better known as the belly of the beast, or the belly of the whale, or the innermost cave. It's the point in the story where our hero is forced to reconcile with their fears and insecurities. And this is how superheroes inspire us and give us hope. We see our heroes lose, forced to their lowest moments, but they still get back up and keep fighting. It can help us find the strength to face whatever struggles we might be dealing with. And if a hero is facing something that is similar to what we're going through, it can inspire us all the more. Now, before I finish up, I want to give a couple more examples of scenes, predominantly from movies, that inspire hope in me in particular. And I encourage anyone in the comments below to share some scenes that they like as well. The first moment is in The Avengers, when we get that famous circle shot at the climax of the film of the camera panning around all the Avengers as they've finally assembled as a team. This then gets amplified in Endgame when we get to portals and everyone shows up and Captain America finally says, "Avengers assemble." That battle cry is very important because it not only instills fear in those they're fighting, but it inspires hope in those they're trying to protect. The other example I want to give is at the end of The Batman, when Gotham is flooding due to the actions of the Riddler and his followers. Batman realizes that the Riddler was inspired by him, that the destruction around him, the destruction of Gotham, was caused by his relentless pursuit of vengeance. Batman realizes that he can't only be a symbol of fear to the criminals, he has to also be a symbol of hope to the people of Gotham. This video is set to be published between the release of Superman and Fantastic Four First Steps, but it is being recorded before either of those movies have been released. Even still, I've seen people hailing both of these movies as a return to form for superhero media, being colorful and hopeful and inspiring. And based on what I've seen, it seems like the creative teams for both movies understand the core elements of the characters that are adapting. Superman is a character of hope and good, and the Fantastic Four is a family before anything else. I think we will always need superheroes. Sure, there will be times when the general public loses interest and probably gets tired of them being around, but when we need them, they'll be there. In our darkest nights, superheroes will never let us down. And with that, I will end the video there. If you made it this far, thank you so much for watching. I appreciate your time and attention. If you haven't already, go ahead and subscribe so you don't miss my next upload, and I will see you all in the next video.